Good morning, folks. I'm headed down to Ottawa to meet with the Prime Minister and my colleagues at the First Minister's meeting that will be held tomorrow and on Friday to bring with them an urgent message on behalf of Albertans. We need the Government of Canada to have our back at this time of an economic crisis in this province. Back in 2008 and 9, during the global financial crisis, we saw governments around the world do extraordinary things to ensure economic stability in financial markets here in Canada, ensuring the future of the auto sector and tens of thousands of jobs related to it in Ontario and Quebec's manufacturing sector. Well, Albertans expect at least that kind of help for the industry that has done more than any other to create jobs, wealth and opportunity, government revenues for social programs than any other, and that is Canada's energy industry. It is the largest subsector of the Canadian economy. It represents $125 billion of annual export value, about 50% more than auto parts, than cars and auto parts do. It is our largest export industry. It's responsible for the direct employment of over 250,000 Canadians, and indirectly is tied to the employment of hundreds of thousands of others, and of course generates revenues that benefit all 36 million Canadians in their healthcare, education, and other social services. We are facing a triple whammy right now with the fragility of our economy after 5 years of economic stagnation, on top of which an apparent global economic downturn instigated by the global spread of the novel coronavirus or COVID-19, and thirdly, the total collapse of energy prices this week as a result of a price war by two unfriendly regimes, the Saudis and the Russians, who are trying to drive North American energy out of business because they'd like to take that market share. We don't think that's good for the globe, it's not good for the environment, and it's certainly not good for Canadian jobs and prosperity to allow Vladimir Putin and the King of Saudi Arabia to seek to wreck the energy industry in this rights-respecting democracy that produces energy at the highest human rights, environmental, and labor standards on earth. These are the messages I'll be taking with a sense of urgency to Ottawa today. In particular, we'll be calling for urgent action to help those who are either sick or in self-isolation as a result of the coronavirus. I understand the Prime Minister made an announcement in this respect this morning. We haven't had a chance to process the details, but we do believe that people need immediate access to employment insurance benefits if they are required to stay at home away from work because of the virus, if they are self-isolating. We don't want anybody to feel that they have to go to work to make a paycheck if they are not necessarily healthy. We want anybody who is feeling cold or flu symptoms to self-isolate, to call 811 here in Alberta to get the advice on whether they need to be tested for the COVID virus. We especially emphasize that point for people returning from abroad, as so far all of the cases that we know of in Alberta have come from travel abroad. Secondly, we will be pushing urgently for immediate job creation efforts, including broadening criteria for employment insurance. We will be picking up on the unanimous support we have from all 13 provinces and territories for an equalization rebate through reform of the fiscal stabilization program by lifting the cap on that program both retroactively and prospectively. Retroactively would represent about $2.4 billion in revenue that we are owed as Albertans. This is not asking for a favor. We pay $20 billion net into the rest of the country every year. All we're asking for is this program that's supposed to provide a fiscal backstop for HAB provinces when they have a sudden decline in revenues, as we did 5 years ago. And that was capped arbitrarily. We need that $2.4 billion right now to help us cope with the collapsing global energy markets and the recession. We'll be pushing for funding such as flow-through shares to stimulate clean and emissions-reducing technology and remediation and completion of abandoned wells to put hardworking blue-collar oil field workers back to work, because right now the energy companies, as a result of the price collapse, are massively cutting their capital budgets for 2020. This is going to have a very negative effect on working women and men in the energy services sector, which in so many ways is that, together with agriculture, the heart of the rural Alberta economy. We need those folks back to work. One way of doing it is through accelerated spending on well reclamation and completion. We've done our part, putting up $100 million additional dollars in the Orphan Well Association. We need the federal government to do its part. We will be, and any additional funding on that, we will be pressing for. We'll be pressing for stimulus through accelerated infrastructure spending and funds to match our Alberta Blueprint for Jobs, and we'll be asking for the federal government to cut the, to cut all the strings and the red tape on that. We need to get that work in the field in this construction season, which begins in a matter of weeks. We have spring breakup coming in about 3 weeks' time. That means a lot of those oil field workers who are now on rig sites will be laid off and probably won't be going back to work because of the price downturn. We need to get folks like that to work on construction sites across the province. We're doing our part with our $7 billion record investment in infrastructure spending this year. We need the federal government to help accelerate that as well. And finally, we'll be making the point that we need this government to get refocused on the economy. Enough about dealing with every fashionable issue out there and the virtue signaling and the UN Security Council and all the rest of it. We are facing an economic crisis in Canada, and we need the national government to act accordingly with total focus on that issue. We need that more in Alberta, I believe, than probably any other part of the country. We've been through 5 tough years while other parts of the country have experienced growth. We were already in a $7 billion deficit position when other parts of the country have been running surpluses. We've contributed $600 billion net to the rest of Canada over the past 5 decades. We have had Canada's back, and it's time for Canada to have Alberta's back. That's the message I'll be taking to Ottawa today. Happy to take your questions.
Hi, Premier. I'm wondering, do you have a specific ask for the oil industry? You say the seriousness of the crisis should be treated like the financial crisis 12 years ago. Do you have a specific bailout request from the industry?
Well, I wouldn't use that word. I would say that we are looking at a range of measures as the government of Alberta. We clearly need the federal government. This is not just a short, but it's also a midterm need to restore confidence in the industry. So a absolute guarantee that we will see the completion of Coastal GasLink and of Trans Mountain expansion are essential. Because let's not forget that the protests, the rail blockades, the slowdown in our economy, the uncertainty, the spooking of investors, we saw what happened with Berkshire Hathaway, that's all part of the context right now. So we need an absolute commitment to the rule of law, the completion of major projects like that. And I will plead with the Prime Minister, please stop hammering this industry. They have pending regulations on methane that could layer over time billions of dollars of additional costs on an industry that is in many respects on life support. We plead with them, work with us on an equivalency agreement on methane that we believe will actually reduce emissions more while minimizing costs to industry. Please hold back on these clean fuel standards, which could layer billions more costs on the industry. Please bring us, if you're not going to repeal the Bill C-69 No More Pipelines law, then exempt future oil sands projects, in situ projects from the project list. Work with us on that. These are issues we've been trying to get the federal government to respond to now for 10 months without success. So those policy issues are critical to find a pathway forward once we get through this price downturn. In the meantime, we will be asking for emergency support for workers who are laid off. We unfortunately do expect to see a number of layoff announcements coming from the energy sector in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and then all of the other counter-cyclical measures that I've mentioned.
And do you expect that the original agenda for the First Minister's meeting is completely off the table? Will it be completely overtaken by the crisis that we're in right now?
Well, I think it has to get refocused. It was focused, because of the Premier's efforts, largely on economic issues like competitiveness, which for us implicitly means Bill C-69. There was a brief 45-minute section on the coronavirus. I expect that will be expanded. But I do hope that we will refocus the agenda on the issue that is of critical importance to Canadians, that's jobs in the economy.
So I'm assuming you've been speaking to some of the leaders of the energy companies.
Yes, all day
over the past
yesterday.
few days. What are they asking for from the Alberta government, either specific measures or even sort of general themes of ways that the Alberta government can help?
Well, we are canvassing industry leaders, not just from energy, but other sectors, for their input. While we are profoundly concerned about the impact of the price collapse on the energy sector, we are also in the midst of what appears to be a global recession that will affect all other sectors. And of course, reduction in spending amongst energy companies will affect everything from the hospitality sector, of course, tourism. You can see this here at this airport. WestJet, a great Alberta-based company. I spoke to Ed Sims, the CEO, yesterday. Their loads and revenue and cash flow are down dramatically. So this is right across the economy. In terms of the energy sector, we are examining a number of options. I said yesterday that everything is on the table. A number of our companies are facing what you would call a liquidity crisis. And as I intimated 3 weeks ago, there may be ways that we can use the province's balance sheet to address that liquidity crisis. So we are analyzing that. We're also looking to see if there are things we can do immediately to reduce payroll cost pressures. The Alberta government, of course, imposes workers' compensation premiums. We note that yesterday the United States government announced a payroll tax holiday to help keep people at work. So we're studying a number of measures. We want to see what the federal government is going to do, and then we will make our own announcement in early April about a package of urgent measures.
Are there any changes to the curtailment program that are under consideration?
Not at this stage. The advice I've received from key industry leaders is just to monitor that very closely, because with the absolute price being so low, let's say WTI at $33, $34, if the differential creeps up over sort of gets into the mid-teens, then it's a complete disaster. So we are going to be closely monitoring inventories. One concern we have is that crude by rail shipments are going to be coming down quite dramatically here. Cenovus, that was the largest player in the private sector in terms of rail shipments, has dramatically reduced its rail program. So I think we're going to probably see crude by rail shipments decline from an expected 500,000 barrels per day in March to next month. I wouldn't be surprised if we're down around 100,000 barrels a day. That may back up inventories to tank tops, and then that stands the risk of blowing out inventories. We will not allow that to happen. We will use the curtailment tool responsibly to ensure at least a survival price for our producers to get through this period.
Yes, Mr. Premier, is there anything that the province could or would do to ease the burden of people shut in, workers shut in, due to the coronavirus?
We're looking at some possible regulatory changes to clarify that. For example, I understand that people have to go in and get a doctor's note in order to be able to go back and get time off work authorized. We're looking at an order in council to remove that requirement. So, because we don't want people who might be sick going into medical clinics and seeing their doctors. So the Minister of Labour, Minister of Finance are working on that. We're also looking at whether we need any clarification that people cannot be laid off for not showing up because they are in self-isolation. I trust Alberta employers. They're not going to penalize people for doing what's responsible in terms of their public health. But we are looking at a whole suite of measures in terms of regulatory changes to better support folks who may need to stay home.
I'm just wondering, when you go to Ottawa, is there any chance you might hear from any of the other premiers or anyone in the federal government that, we understand your plight in Alberta? Maybe one of the things you could do is align yourselves with other provinces and impose a PST.
I don't know. Okay, so first of all, I'm pleased to report that we do have tremendous support from my colleagues, premiers of provinces and territories. They have unanimously supported our call for lifting the cap on the fiscal stabilization program, both retroactively and prospectively. 9 of 10 provinces have supported our opposition to Bill C-69. I think we have 6 provinces supporting us in challenging the federal carbon tax. We have 10 of 10 provinces supporting us on the concept of energy and resource corridors. We have all 10 provinces and 3 territories supporting Alberta's call for expanding liquefied natural gas export opportunities. And I just get a strong sense of solidarity around the table for the people of Alberta. But so they're not asking me to do anything. They realize they've all benefited from Alberta enormously. Their citizens, their treasuries, their services, their economies have all benefited from Alberta. We're gathering the data, by the way, about how much employers in other provinces benefit from as suppliers of goods and services to the Alberta energy sector, and it's enormous. They understand that. In terms of a sales tax, there could not possibly be a worse time to impose a multi-billion-dollar new tax than the midst of an economic crisis like this, when demand is going down, to further suppress economic demand by taking thousands of dollars out of the pockets of families just as their incomes are going down, makes absolutely no sense. I don't think any premier or the federal government would expect Alberta to further hammer its own economy in the midst of this downturn through a sales tax.
Hi there, Premier. Just wondering, Ottawa announced over $1 billion today to fight COVID-19, $500 million of that for provinces and territories. Do we know how that's going to be allocated for Alberta, and do you anticipate that will be enough for some of the asks you have today?
We have not yet received any details from Ottawa on the announcement. Normally, they would allocate that provincial funding on a per capita basis. In our case, that would probably represent about $60 million, and we appreciate that. Our initial estimate of the prospective cost to the health system of the coronavirus is in the range of $80 million, so it doesn't cover that. However, if the virus if the virus spreads at a level beyond what we are currently estimating, the costs will be significantly higher than that. So we will certainly monitor that and stay in touch with the Government of Canada. We do appreciate any support. It's very important as well that we are working with other provinces and the federal government on ensuring access to personal protection equipment for our medical professionals. As you will imagine, there is a scarcity of those supplies globally right now, and this is something I'll be raising with the Prime Minister. We may need the federal government to use extraordinary powers to work with manufacturers to ensure the production of personal protection equipment if this thing becomes even more serious.
And you touched on this earlier, that you spoke to WestJet's CEO, hearing that it may lead to potential job losses just in their situation. Do you think this is the tip of the iceberg?
We certainly hope not. But there's no doubt that the aviation sector, airlines, are being massively affected by the huge decline in global travel. And WestJet, for example, just brought on recently a direct nonstop Calgary to Rome flight. Yesterday, Air Canada canceled all their flights to Italy. So the airlines are hemorrhaging cash right now. And one thing that I will be taking as a very clear message to Ottawa is any benefit that Air Canada receives as the so-called flagship carrier must be equivalent to benefit that WestJet receives. We will not accept any kind of regional favoritism when it comes to any prospective future federal support for the airlines.
Hey, Premier, how receptive are you anticipating the federal government to be towards some of these asks from Alberta, especially something like that stimulus package?
Well, look, all I can say is I've been adding to our list of asks since coming to office in May without really any response. And in Ottawa, in December, I was there with half our cabinet. We had 5 specific timely requests. And we've had, some nice conversations with the Deputy Prime Minister Freeland. Our Finance Minister has had, I think, constructive conversations with his counterpart, Bill Morneau. But so far, there really has been no action. So my message is we're running out of time here. Enough talk, we need action. And we, as I always say, we're not asking for a handout or special treatment. This, in many ways, has been the heart of the Canadian economy. And all Canadians are in this. Finance Minister Morneau will be briefed this week about the impact on his budget, his deficit, and the national economy as the result of what's happening in Alberta today. This is about helping Albertans get through this. Is about helping the Canadian economy get through this. So my pitch is not a regional one, it's a national one.
And I guess, is there a bar set for what would make this trip successful or unsuccessful?
Well, I think the bar will probably be seen not in a communique, because they tend to be very generic documents, but in the federal budget that we expect in 2 weeks' time. That's testing time.
Premier, you said you were talking to energy leaders as well, and they were also looking at layoffs.
Yes, I don't think that's any secret. A number of our energy companies saw their share valuation go down by as much as 90%, 90% in the last 48 hours. Many of them have basically no cash flow, and many of them have already announced dramatic reductions in their capital budgets for this year. Now, some of the folks I spoke to yesterday gave me a sense of confidence that they're prepared to get through this. And this I said on Monday. Our companies are more efficient, more resilient, and more innovative than they've ever been. They've made lemonade out of the lemons of the past 5 years by compressing their production costs, their operating costs, improving their balance sheets, in many cases paying down debt and buying back shares. So many of them are in a much stronger position to weather this storm than they might have been 5 years ago. But it doesn't make it any prettier. They're cutting capital spending. That's really going to affect the service sector in particular in terms of employment.
Could this be the tipping point for some of the companies?
Obviously, yes. And there are a range of companies that are not well prepared for this downturn. That's part of the problem. This is after 5 years of fragility, when a number of companies have been leveraging themselves in debt. A lot of them cannot cut operating costs any further. And they cannot raise equity, and in this environment, many of them will be challenged to roll over their debt. So one way the federal government potentially could assist would be to be in discussions with us, like I said, about liquidity. Are there things that we can do working with the banks to extend some runway to some of these companies to get through the price downturn? Those are the kinds of discussions with which we are engaged, both with industry, the banks, and the Government of Canada.
Bonjour, Monsieur Kenney. Je voudrais savoir un peu, je comprends que vous n'avez pas de réaction nécessairement au plan d'Ottawa, mais c'était quoi que vous demandiez? Et puis, comment vous pensez que l'argent qui a été annoncé ce matin, comment ça va être utilisé ici en Alberta?
Nous remercions le gouvernement fédéral de leur annonce aujourd'hui d'un peu d'argent pour s'adresser aux situations de santé urgentes, le coronavirus, et également certaines mesures en ce qui concerne l'assurance d'emploi. Mais on a besoin de beaucoup plus d'actions à cause de la récession mondiale qui a commencé avec le coronavirus, et également la chute de prix de pétrole ici en Alberta qui est désastreuse. Alors, je vais exiger l'action fiscale, une accélération des investissements dans l'infrastructure et également les mesures pour accélérer la réclamation des puits de pétrole pour s'adresser à une enjeux environnementaux. Il y a plus et c'est très important pour nous autres d'avoir un remboursement de programme de stabilisation fiscale. Ça veut dire une sorte de remboursement de péréquation vers l'Alberta. Le Québec et toutes les autres provinces nous ont appuyés à cet égard. Alors, voici. Et enfin, je vais souligner que la crise économique ici est une crise à l'échelle nationale. Tous les Canadiens sont liés à la santé de l'économie albertaine, avec l'industrie le plus large de toutes les industries au Canada. Ça serait mon message.
Et est-ce qu'il y a des mesures que vous prévoyez, vous, le gouvernement de l'Alberta, par rapport au coronavirus, particulièrement sur les travailleurs qui doivent s'isoler?
Oui, notre ministre du Travail et ministre des Finances travaillent sur les mesures réglementaires pour que les travailleurs qui doivent rester chez eux à cause de la maladie peuvent recevoir I'm sorry, this is really technical.
Okay.
I'll try this again.
Go ahead.
Nous considérons les réglementations pour que les travailleurs puissent avoir l'approbation de leur médecin plus facile, pour qu'ils ne doivent pas aller dans une clinique parce que c'est pas sûr en ce qui concerne la santé publique. Alors, nous étudions toutes sortes de mesures à cet égard.
Merci.
We have time for one more.
Good morning, Premier. Doctors are holding town halls and rallies to protest changes to their working conditions and billing. What concessions are your government willing to consider before those changes April 1st?
Well, I'm not sure what working conditions is about. Our government has just announced in the last 3 weeks over $300 million in investing in expanding the Peter Lougheed Emergency Ward, the Red Deer Hospital, and other infrastructure for upgrading our surgical rooms around the province. So the working conditions, we're investing in that. If you're talking about pay, what we've said to the physicians is that we have a budget limit of $5.4 billion. That's more than we've ever paid physicians in Alberta history. They are the best paid physicians in Canada. Their gross billings are $94,000 more per year than they are in Ontario, for example. And we simply must have some kind of control, because without that control, they are set to increase the physician compensation by another $2 billion. And here's what I would say to our excellent physicians, who deserve to be compensated fairly and even generously. The average private sector family in Alberta has seen their income go down by 8% over the past 5 years. The average public sector family has seen their income flatlined for the past 5 years. Physicians' compensation has gone up by something like 20%. And we are now facing a major downturn, which is where we're going to see more layoffs and more decline in people's incomes. So I would ask the Alberta Medical Association to please pay attention to the context in which they are asking for another 20% increase in compensation. That is not realistic in the situation that we have in Alberta today. Thanks very much, folks.
Hello again, I'm Martin Stringer, and you have been listening to Alberta Premier Jason Kenney. He was at the Calgary airport speaking to reporters just before heading to Ottawa, where he'll be taking part in the First Minister's Conference, which is